Chapter 9. Kidnapped. "Amy! Amy!" Jack called. She must be nearby somewhere. But there was no answer. He kicked around amongst the trash at the back of the cave. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe she'd left a note. Nothing. Jack picked up Amy's shawl. What now? Maybe she'd gotten tired of staying in the cave and had climbed up to the street to walk around. Should he look for her, or just wait? As he stood uncertainly at the cave opening, his eyes were drawn again to the deep gouge in the sand at the river's edge. He inspected it more carefully. It was about 4 feet long, coming right out of the water. In fact, at the water's edge, where the water was no more than an inch deep, Jack could see that the groove extended into the river. Something had been dragged up out of the river. Something heavy, like a boat. Of course! That was it! Someone had beached a boat in the cave. As he looked more closely, Jack could see large boot prints in the sand. Then, right next to the water, where the sand was damp and firm, Jack saw Amy's footprint on top of one of the boot prints. The clues were clear. A boat had stopped, and Amy had gone away in it. But who could have been in the boat? And where could Amy have gone? Jack looked out over the river in the late afternoon sun. There were several boats on the river, but none small enough to be beached in the cave. "Amy! Amy!" Jack yelled with all his might out over the water. His voice echoed in the hollow confines of the cave and off the stone bridge above. But there was no answer from his sister. "Amy, Amy, Amy," muttered Jack as he stumbled around inside the cave, kicking the sand with his feet. "Don't leave me, Amy. Papa's dead, Mama's gone." He still didn't like saying the words out loud that admitted that his mother was dead. Jack kicked angrily at the charred sticks in the fire pit. "And now you've run off. How will we ever find Uncle Sedgwick?" That's when Jack noticed the water bucket. It had been tipped over. He felt the sand around it. Wet. Strange, thought Jack. Amy wouldn't dump out our water. But someone had, and not very long ago either, because the sand was more than damp. It was wet, very wet, like someone had just poured out the water 10 or 15 minutes ago. One of Amy's footprints was planted squarely in this wet sand, too, but it was also pulled off to the side as though her foot had been dragged away. A terrible realization began to sweep over Jack. Amy hadn't gone off on some errand, and she hadn't gone off willingly with someone in a boat. She had fought. She'd struggled, and then she'd been taken away against her will. Amy had been kidnapped. That's why the water bucket was tipped over. That's why her shawl had been left behind, and that's what all the tracks in the sand indicated. Someone had grabbed her and pulled her into that boat. She had been kidnapped. There was no getting around it. As soon as Jack realized what had happened, he felt certain he knew who had done it. It had to be those 2 men who had fired the flares at the Salvationists, the ones Jack almost hit when he was throwing rocks at the river rat. Yeah, those river rats were the only people who knew anyone was staying in this cave, and they would have had time. If they had come on the river instead of running all around through the streets of London as Jack had done, they could easily have been here and gone before Jack arrived. But why? Why would they have wanted to kidnap Amy? Somewhere in the back of Jack's mind there was a clue. They had been angry at Jack for throwing rocks and had threatened him if he ever did it again. But there was something else. Something they had said, not to him, but about what? And then Jack remembered. It was what they'd said about Amy. The one rowing had said something like, "Hey, Rodney, it's a girl." And the other one, the big burly one, who had been standing up yelling at Jack, had said, "Yeah, just about the right age, too." The right age for what? Wondered Jack aloud, and the moment he said it, a cold chill ran down his spine. Those men were white slavers, and they'd taken Amy. Jack fought back against a wave of panic that swept over him. He had to find his sister. He had to get her back. Out of the cave Jack ran, almost slipping on the rocks as he scrambled around the pillar. In a moment he had scampered up the wall and was on the street. Where would he go? Whom could he ask? How could he find her? He ran along the river's edge, looking at all the boats going peacefully back and forth below. Amy had to be in one of them. But what if he were going in the wrong direction? While he ran himself breathless going up the river, what if the kidnappers were rowing as fast as they could down the river with Amy tied up under an old blanket in the bottom of the boat so no one could see her? Jack's mind ran wild as he tried to imagine what could be happening to her. Would she be nailed in a coffin and thrown down into the dark, damp hold of a ship? Would she die from too much of the drug? Or would she wake up and go crazy trying to scratch her way out? Would she be sold to someone who would beat her? And then he sucked in his breath with a start. Whether the person who bought her beat her or not, she wouldn't be free. He might not ever see her again. Jack ran all the faster. He dodged through day merchants pushing their carts back from the market. He pushed aside groups of other children in his way. He tripped over the bucket of a fisherman who stood with a pole in line at the wall by the river's edge. But he never saw Amy. In fact, he didn't see even one boat that looked like the one that the sailors had been in. Finally, Jack fell to the cobblestone street, exhausted and crying in great sobs as he tried to catch his breath. It was useless. He could never find his sister this way. He could run up and down the Thames River and all over London for days without ever seeing her. By then, she might be shipped off to face some horrible life. He didn't want to think about it. Slowly, he picked himself up and walked back toward the cave. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe he was imagining all this. Yeah, that had to be it. Amy wasn't really kidnapped. She'd just gone out to get some fresh air and would be back in their cave by the time he got there. He should just settle down and quit imagining the worst. He took a deep breath and thought about the Salvationists. If there was a God like they said there was, he certainly wouldn't let such a terrible thing happen to his sister. After all, she'd never done anything so bad. She hadn't even thrown stuff at the Salvationists. And then another thought crossed Jack's mind. What if God was punishing her because of the bad things he had done? Oh, God, he found himself saying, please don't. Don't let her be kidnapped. I won't throw any more stuff at that Salvation Army, and I won't steal any more apples or anything. But when he got to the cave, it was just as he had left it. Amy was not there.